Hey, there's something about your trial or your hardship that you probably haven't considered. There's this secret thing that God is doing. And I'm going to talk to you about that in a few minutes. I'm Pastor Cary. This is the Growing in the Gospel YouTube channel. Thanks for clicking play on this stream of devotions. We are slow walking through the Psalms, and you've joined me for Psalm 86, and we just may finish Psalm 86 today. So if you'd like to have the entire Psalm, the entire study, go back to the playlist, and you can click one video at a time. But now we are at verse 16. Yesterday, David prayed about his enemies. He said, verse 14, "The proud are risen against me. The assemblies of the violent men have sought after my soul, have not set thee before them. But thou, O Lord," so David gets his eyes back on the Lord, "but thou, O Lord, art a God full of compassion and gracious, long-suffering and plenteous in mercy and truth." So now his request. All of this time, he's been lifting up his soul and talking about the goodness of God and expressing that he wants God to hear him. And then he lays out his struggle. He's rehearsed the great mercy of God and the great character qualities of God. And now we finally get down to verse 16, and he gets to his request. His heart is in such a good place at this point. And that's why I use the little word acts as a framework for prayer, ACTS, adoration, confession, thanksgiving, supplication. So your request, supplication, is the last step. And one of the reasons for that is by the time you get to supplication, you have so adored the character and the heart and the great qualities of who God is, and you have confessed any known sin, any distance between you, and you've given thanks for so many things in your life. You've got a very different perspective now on your prayer request or on your trial or hardship. So David finally now says in verse 16, and I want to read verses 16 and 17. Wow, there's so much here. We may split it into 2 days, but we may get through it. "O turn unto me and have mercy upon me." Now, I've said this before in our studies. The idea that David wants God to turn to him is a bit of a rhetorical idea because God has never turned away from him. And so this is what gives us the sense that in the Psalms, we're processing human experience. Often against that experience goes against what we know to be the fixed dynamic or the fixed reality of our existence with God. When we are his through Jesus, he's never turned away from us. But that doesn't mean you won't feel like he's turned away from you. And so the psalmists are like, "God, you've forgotten me." Did he really forget them? Of course not. They feel like he's forgotten them. "Lord, will you remember us? How long, Lord, will you cast us off?" Did he really comprehensively cast them off permanently? No. There's no sense in which you would ever be cast off from God once you belong to him, but you can feel that, okay? So David, because of his enemies, because of his hardship and trial, he feels like the Lord's turned away, or in some sense, he needs to experience the knowledge and the sense that God is turned and is active, is very active. You know what David's asking? Lord, before he asks God to defeat his enemies and deliver him, he says, "Lord, could you just show me your presence here? I need to know that you're here in this with me." And isn't that the way it is with so many of our trials? More important than getting healed or getting delivered or getting brought out of the trial immediately, we need to just first get a sense that God's with us in it. Jesus came to his disciples in the storm. So David says, "Turn unto me and have mercy upon me." Of course, that mercy would be mercy to strengthen me. You're going to see this in a minute, in this storm, in this trial, in the middle of this hardship, and ultimately to deliver me from it. But how does the mercy of God get expressed? David continues how he wants God to show mercy. He says, "Give thy strength unto thy servant. Give thy strength unto thy servant." Do you see this? Lord, before I say defeat my enemies, before I say get me out of this trouble, the first thing I'm saying is I'm accepting that you may want me in it for now. And so while I'm in it, I need your strength. I need to know you've turned towards me. I need to know that you are pouring out mercy upon me, and I need your strength, and I am casting myself in dependence on your strength. And oh my goodness, my friend, God is a giver of strength. Maybe your request today needs to be first, not get me out of this or solve this or resolve this. Maybe it needs to be, Lord, if it's your will for me to walk through this valley of the shadow of death, then strengthen me in it. Give your strength unto thy servant. I love how David qualifies this. I am your servant. I'm here to do your will. I'm not here to write my own story or my own ticket. If this is your will for me, if you want me to take this journey, I'm going to take it. I'm your servant. And save the son of thine handmaid. Now, this is an interesting phrase. Save the son of thine handmaid. Obviously, David's referring to his mom, okay, because he says the son. He's referring to his mom's devotion to the Lord as the handmaid of the Lord. I'm reminded as I read this, the prayer of Mary, behold the handmaid of the Lord, when the angel comes to her and tells her that God's going to rewrite her whole life and she's going to have the Messiah. She's going to give birth to the Son of God. She says, behold the handmaid of the Lord, be it unto me according to thy word. It's an expression of subservience. It's an expression of devotion, of total followership. I'm not going to resist you, God. I'm not going to fight you. I'm your servant. But here's what I want you to catch about this, and this is really interesting. The idea of save the son of thy, the first phrase, give your strength unto thy servant, is an expression of personal devotion. Save the son of thine handmaid takes it a layer deeper. And here's why. The handmaid was a servant. I hesitate to use the modern sense of the word slave because in ancient world, this was a very different relationship than we understand in modern slavery in terms of deep, dark oppression and abuse. And God had some very specific guidelines for servants, servitude. And on the spectrum of work relationships, it was much closer to an employee-employer relationship. It was much closer to a person in the employ of another person. And yet this was more of a permanent situation. A handmaid is a servant. Okay, so Sarah had a handmaid, Hagar, and I don't have time to unpack the justice or injustice of these ancient structures. I'm just explaining what the terms that David is using means. Okay, but the handmaid would have had a family and given birth to her own children, who would have grown up in a relationship of servitude to their master or their family that they were serving in this broader relationship. And so the children would have grown up knowing only this relationship of servitude, and they would have, the children of the handmaid would have been known to be especially devoted, especially loyal, especially committed, more so than someone that was brought into the employment much later. I'm reminded of a movie I saw years ago of a butler who served multiple presidents, and he worked in the White House, and he loved his job. He loved the role that he got to do, and he was considered a friend of all the families of all these presidents. I forget the name of them. I think it was just called The Butler, but it was a profound account of a man who accepted a job, a full-time career in a very prominent situation. And he just grew up in that situation, befriending all the families. And his family were friends of the presidential families. This is the sense of this, okay? That he felt endeared to those presidents. And he was considered a dear friend. I think it was Ronald Reagan that actually invited him to a state dinner. And it was the first time he and his wife had ever gotten invited to a state dinner, which is sad. But it was so cool to understand his relationship as not just a servant, but a friend to the presidents, and his family, friends to the president's families. Here's the point. That relationship over generations and over many White Houses was especially symbolic of devoted loyalty. When David uses the phrase, save the son of thine handmaid, he is saying, I'm not just your servant. I am your especially generationally devoted servant. I am deeply, deeply yours. And he is asking God for strength on the basis of the fact that he truly, deeply, multi-generationally belongs to God. Well, let's keep reading. Verse 17 is wonderful, and we come in for a landing now for Psalm 86, but this is amazing. Show me a token for good, that they which hate me may see it and be ashamed, because thou, Lord, hast holpen or partnered with me, helped me. and comforted me. So let's go back to these words, show me a token for good. Now, my first reading of this, I'm thinking David is asking for a token, some pinhole of light, some measure of blessing, some gift that speaks to the presence of God, that speaks to the blessing of favor of God, that speaks to the providence of God's unfolding work in his life. Like, show me something good in this. All right. But that's not really the essence of this phrase, show me a token for good. And here's the first hint we get. Well, let's just back up for a minute. Show me could be show to me. It could also be show me as, okay? So is he saying show to me a token for good? Or is he saying show me as a token for good? Well, let's keep reading. That they which hate me may see it. Now this is where the Bible is such a wonderful mechanism for interpreting itself, okay? When you're looking at an obscure phrase like show me a token for good, and you wonder, what is it saying? Is it saying show to me a token for good or show me as a token for good? You have this interpretive mechanism that David says that they which hate me may see it. So he wants the enemies of God and his own enemies to see something, okay? He wants them to see it. So obviously now we see he's asking God to take him as a billboard and show him as a token or as a message of goodness so that those which hate him will see it and be ashamed or in a sense be convicted. There's a sense here where David is praying that God's favor in his life and preservation and protection will be used as a source of conviction, a convicting message to his enemies, that they will see it and either be convicted and turn to repentance or be convicted and ashamed that they have chosen the losing side. Okay. Because thou, O Lord, has helped me and comforted me. So this is coming back to my opening statement about God doing something secret, something you haven't considered in your trial or hardship. Often we pray, God, deliver me, God, get me out of this, God, solve this, God, heal me, God, take it away. It takes an extra layer of faith and next level followership to say, God, I'm in it by your grace, by your design, and I'm praying for your strength in it. If you want me to be in this and facing these trials, then give me strength in it. And it's next level to say, and this is it, God, turn my trial into a message and turn me into a messenger in my suffering. Use my hardship to proclaim. Make me a billboard. Make my hardship a megaphone for your goodness and your reality and your grace and for the gospel. And I'm going to tell you something, friend. This is not only next level. This is an amazing experience when you allow God to turn your suffering or trial into a megaphone. Why is it so important to do this? That you don't just sit down at the door of self-pity and pout, okay, and wish God would get you out of this misery. Well, because God's just handed you a megaphone and a platform. And your testimony for the gospel, it whispers on your good days. Like, it's easy to believe. I mean, it's easy to follow God on your good days. But your testimony shouts loudly from the platform and through the megaphone of your suffering. There's a lot of people that don't want to listen to you on your blessed days. But when you're suffering, when you're sick, when you're having a hard time, and people know it, and you're able to look up and point to God and say, though he slay me, yet will I trust him. When you're able to declare the goodness of God from the grip of your pain and suffering, people listen. People sit up and take note, and they're like, what do you have? I need a dose of what you have. I need the strength and the grace, and whatever's at work in your life, I need some of that. And suddenly you have a hearing with people who maybe you've tried to share the gospel with them or teach them about Jesus or God many, many times, but now because you're sick and you're suffering, now you have their ear. Your trial is an opportunity. It's a golden opportunity. It is a platform. It is a megaphone. It is a sound system that gives you the ear of many, many people that you would never have the ear of. So David realizes that, and he says, God, show me for a token of good. Put me up as a billboard. Use me as your poster child for your goodness, that others may see it and be convicted or ashamed, because you, Lord, have helped me and you've comforted me. God is a God of help and comfort and strength and grace. And this psalm has been so amazing. It has blessed me immensely. I hope it's blessed you. That is growing in the gospel for today. Take your trial, turn it into a platform, use it as a megaphone, share the gospel from the grip of your pain, and you'll be glad. You'll celebrate the good things that God's going to do. Hey, share this with somebody. Drop a comment or a question. I love to interact with you. Have a great day. I'm praying for you. See you tomorrow.